Good afternoon, everybody. Today we will be studying about the organism Staphylococcus, how this organism is involved in food poisoning or food infection. To start with the history of this organism, it was first studied, isolated, and named by a Scottish surgeon by Alexander Ogston in the year 80. He first isolated this organism in the lesions, in the wounds of the of human beings, and thus he named the organism as Staphylococcus. The first outbreak of this organism, the first food poisoning outbreak, was seen in USA, Michigan in the year 1884. It was the spread due to the contaminated cheese. The cheese was contaminated by Staphylococcus aureus. Now, generally, the illness, that is, every year around 241,000 people get infected due to this organism and result in food infection. Moving on to the classification of this organism, it belongs to the domain bacteria, class Bacilli, order Bacillales, family Staphylococcaceae, and the genus Staphylococcus. Now, if we have to study about the morphology of the organism, it is a gram-positive cocci, and it is gram-positive cocci in clusters. When you see this organism under the microscope, it looks like bunch of grapes. So, in Greek, staphyle meaning bunch of grapes, bunch, and coccus meaning berry. So that's the name. So it looks just like bunch of grapes under the microscope, and that's why the name has been given as Staphylococcus. They are non-spore forming organisms, and they produce a toxin, that is enterotoxin. Now, what is the meaning of enterotoxin? Enterotoxin is a toxin which affects your intestine. It's a toxin produced by the microorganism which affects your intestine. They could be aerobes and they could be facultative anaerobes. Now, where these organisms can be present, they can be present on the skin of the human beings. Generally, you find them easily. I mean, they are present in the cuts and wounds, in the lesions, in the skin lesions. They cause skin related diseases generally, and also present in the mucous membrane, that is your mucous layers. They are present, your nostrils, these are the, in your upper respiratory tract, these are the places that these organisms can easily be present. That's on your skin and the nostrils. So this is very important for the spread, so you should remember these things. Now, which media this organism can be grown on? Easily this organism can be grown on the simple media, the basal media, that is nutrient agar. Apart from this, it has a special media which is the MSA. It's called as a mannitol salt agar, and it also grows on enriched media, that is blood agar. This organism growth enhances if it is if 0.5% of NaCl is added. So the growth enhances for this particular organism. Now, how are the colony characteristics? If this organism is grown on nutrient agar or mannitol salt agar, it can be easily identified because it has a characteristic feature of golden yellow pigment. It produces a typical golden yellow pigment, and the colony looks like a dry oil paint. If you just drop one drop of oil paint on a paper, and after it dries, how it appears. So it has a typical dry oil paint appearance. The colonies are round, smooth, raised, and glistening. They shine, and as I told, they have a golden yellow pigment. They are small colonies, and if grown on blood agar, they show beta and gamma hemolysis. Beta means complete hemolysis and gamma means no hemolysis. Now, they can cause food poisoning. Now, what do they cause generally? They cause food poisoning because of the presence of enterotoxin, which means they cause food poisoning because of the presence of the toxin. Okay, remember in the beginning we had spoken about infection and intoxication. So these causes intoxication. Now, according to WHO, the definition of this food poisoning caused by Staphylococcus aureus is illness caused by Staphylococcus aureus is an acute infection that develops after ingestion of the food contaminated with enterotoxin produced by this bacterium. Okay, basically what they want to say is that it is a infection or it is an intoxication, okay, which is caused due to the enterotoxin that is produced by the microorganism. And basically this is a acute infection. Acute means it is short lived, it does not prolong, the disease is not long, it doesn't stay for many days. So that is what is the basic definition, that is what it means. Okay, moving on to what are the symptoms. Generally, the symptoms are vomiting, nausea, diarrhea. Sometimes you see dysentery. I had told you in my previous classes what is the difference between diarrhea and dysentery. And apart from these symptoms, they can also get fever, weakness, dizziness, chills. Now, the incubation period is 1 to 10 hours. That is, once the toxin enters into your body, not the organism, within 1 to 10 hours, the person starts showing the symptoms. So that's the incubation period. And within 1 to 2 days, the person recovers also. So the disease is actually self-limiting. Okay, so the disease is self-limiting. It spreads, or the infection is generally because of the two conditions. Now, what are the two conditions? One is presence of the organism in the food and presence of enterotoxin. Now, how the organism enters into the food? Probably when the food was brought or bought, the food was not contaminated, but later on it got contaminated. That is because the food was improperly handled. The second reason is because of the presence of enterotoxin. Maybe the food while cooking, the organisms were not there, but when the food was stored improperly, then you could find the organisms would have gained entry into the food, produced the toxin, and that food which is having the toxin you are consuming. So that's how you are getting the infection. So maybe because of the organism that's present, you are taking in the organism along with the food. Because of improper food handling, the person may be a carrier of that organism, so he may give you the food improperly handled. Enterotoxin, that's the food is stored improperly. Second is contamination, that is how does it get contaminated. That I told you, that is improperly handled, which means what, the person who is serving food, like we have many street foods in India. These street foods are just handled by a person whom you do not know whether the hands are cleaned, washed. As I told you, the organism can be easily present on the skin of the individual's lesions. So if suppose a person is having lesions or the organism is present on the skin, the person, without washing the hand, serves you the food, the street food. Definitely you would have seen the person doesn't washes the hand, isn't it, every time. So the person serves the food, organism enters into the food and you take in the organism. So that's how improper handling, or maybe the person might have sneezed during the processing of the food, or maybe during the preparation, or maybe while the food is stored, or the food is not covered properly. Now, what are the physical conditions for the microorganism to grow in this food? It has a very wide temperature, that is, the temperature range is 7 to 48 degree centigrade. 7 degrees centigrade to 48, that's a huge range. Okay, and the growth enhances in the presence of 6.5% of NaCl. Now, how many organisms, if present, can release the enterotoxin? That is 10,000 cells per gram of the food, if present, can release the toxin, and you may be down with the symptoms. The person may start showing the symptoms after this number is attained. Now, what are the foods that is generally associated? The foods include the non-vegetarians, basically the poultry or the meat products, ham, corn, beef, etc. The other food includes milk products, the foods which is stored for a long time, that is the canned foods, bakery products. Yes, we love bakery products. So this bakery products also, because they are stored for a long duration, they are not even cooked. If you consider cake, it is stored for a long time. The pastry, the cream which is added on the cake, it's definitely uncooked, so easily the organism can enter into the cake. And what are the complications seen if the organism enters? As I told, it is self-limiting disease. It does not cause a long, it's acute infection. It becomes severe only in children and immunocompromised people. What do you mean by immunocompromised? If the immune system is weak, if they are already suffering from any other infection, automatically the immunity drops. So in those cases, and also the elderly people. Diagnosis, how do you do the diagnosis? If it doesn't reach to that level, that diagnosis has to be done, but generally the food sample is taken and the stool sample is taken, and staining is done, culturing of the organism is done, and on nutrient agar and specialized media on mannitol salt agar. What is the prevention? Prevention, it's basically, it has to be, food has to be handled properly. Ensure that if the food, generally you saw the foods associated are all of animal origin, so the food that is of animal origin should be obtained in a hygienic condition. That's if the person is milking the cow, should not sneeze. If you sneeze automatically, I told you the organism is present in your nostrils, it can enter into the milk. So, the person should clean the hands, wash the hands properly. If the person is having any lesions, should be covered, or they have to be avoided. Food handlers, if they are having skin infection, lesion, they must not handle the food. Separate out raw food and the cooked food. Okay, and the food handlers must be in appropriate clothing and ensure the food is maintained above 60 degrees centigrade, because I told you what is the range the organism grows, or it can be stored below 4 degrees centigrades. Now after storage, definitely you have to reheat the food and then only consume it. So when you are reheating the food, make sure that the heating is done for about more than 75 degree centigrade. Now treatment is generally not required here, because it is self-limiting. Within a day or two, by the time you realize you are sick, the person recovers. Oral rehydration and salt intake has to be there, because there is diarrhea and vomiting. It is resistant to penicillin, hence that cannot be given. Vancomycin could be given. Now if the person is having this organism, then Bactroban can be, could be inserted in 2 to 3 drops of Bactroban can be inserted into the nostrils. That is for the carriers, not after the infection, not after the person is getting food. This Bactroban is not for food infection. Bactroban is for the person who is carrying the organism in his nostril. So 2 to 3 drops of Bactroban, it is a topical drops which could be added into the nostrils thrice a day, so that he minimizes the spread, or so that he doesn't spread the disease. So these are the treatments. Thank you, students.